The coins struck the marble like little bells of cruelty, one by one by one. Charity Pemberwick stood very still beneath the chandelier of Calthorpe House, her gray woolen shawl damp from a 5-mile walk through Cheapside mud. In her chapped hands she held a sealed phial of rose oil, ordered and paid for. Above her, on the curved staircase, Lady Augusta Calthorpe lifted her powdered chin and let the words fall slowly. "A commoner does not belong here." Her daughter Lavinia smiled, thin as a blade, and accused the girl of theft. Harriet flung another handful of shillings at her feet. Charity did not bend to pick them up. At the top of the staircase, half hidden in candlelight, a tall figure in black velvet and gold thread watched without moving. The scar above his left brow caught the light. Constantine Lascelles, Marquess of Ardley, the coldest and most feared lord in the kingdom, set one gloved hand on the banister. In the pocket of his coat, 3 years old now, lay a small metal button, lost one winter night in an alley off the East End. In her apron pocket lay its twin. She did not yet know him. He knew her at once. What he did when he reached the bottom of those stairs would set the whole of London talking before sunrise. Before the story begins, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of justice, dignity, and love that arrives against all odds move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. In the spring of 1815, in a narrow lane off Cheapside where the chimneys leaned toward one another like gossiping widows, Charity Pemberwick measured 3 drops of rose oil into a small green vial and held it up against the smoke of the apothecary fire. The light through the window was poor. The window itself had not been washed since her father's funeral 2 winters past, and the soot had thickened into a brown gauze that softened the world outside into shapes without names. She tilted the vial. The oil caught the firelight and burned, for one breath, the color of a courtier's ring. She corked it. She sealed the cork with a careful daub of red wax, pressed the bone seal into the wax, and set the vial in a square of clean linen on the counter. Her hands were red from the soap and the pestle, and there was a thin white scar across the knuckle of her right thumb where a glass flask had cut her in November. She did not look at her hands. She had stopped looking at her hands the year she turned 19, and understood that no looking would change them. Behind her, the kettle muttered. The shop smelled of camphor, of beeswax, of dried lavender hung in bunches from the low beams, and beneath all of these, faintly, of the river. Charity untied her stained apron, folded it, and laid it across the back of the stool. From the drawer beneath the counter, she took a small object wrapped in a twist of brown paper, and from the brown paper she drew a button. It was a button of dark blue enamel chased in gold, with the device of a stag's head crowned, no larger than a 6pence. It had no business in a Cheapside apothecary's drawer. She had carried it in her pocket for 3 years, and put it away only when she could not bear the weight of it any longer, and taken it out again on mornings like this one, when she meant to step beyond her own door. The button had come from a coat she had not seen since. The coat had been wrapped around her shoulders in an alley off Houndsditch, on a night when she had been 17 and very nearly killed. She had not seen the face of the man who wrapped it. She had seen only the long line of a black sleeve and a gloved hand, and a voice low above her ear that said, "Walk with me to the lane, do not look back." When she had stood under a lamp at the corner of Bishopsgate, she had pulled the coat from her shoulders to return it, and he had already gone. The button had come off in her grip when she had clutched at him. She put the button into the small pocket at her waist, and tied the pocket twice. Then she lifted the wrapped vial, took down her brown shawl from its peg, set the straw bonnet upon her head, and tied the faded ribbon under her chin. Mrs. Hocking, from the chandler's 2 doors down, put her gray head into the shop. "Going up west, are we, Miss Pemberwick?" "To Calthorpe House," Charity said. "The Viscountess sent for the rose oil." Mrs. Hocking sucked her teeth. "Sent for it by a girl. Couldn't send a footman." "It was specified," Charity said, "that I bring it myself." "Mind your purse on the Strand, then, and mind your shoes." Mrs. Hocking's eyes dropped to Charity's shoes, which had been her mother's, and which had been resoled twice in 2 years and would not bear a third. "And mind your tongue, child, they are not our sort." "I shall mind all of it, Mrs. Hocking." The bell above the door rang her out into the lane. The rain had stopped before dawn and left the cobbles slick. Cheapside ran east to west with carts and porters and the smell of fish, and beyond Cheapside lay Cornhill and the Royal Exchange. and beyond the exchange the long miles westward through Ludgate, along Fleet, up the Strand, into the Haymarket, and at last into the polite streets of Mayfair, where Calthorpe House stood behind iron railings on the south side of Hanover Square. She had walked it once before, the autumn she was 19, with a flask of camphor for an elderly baronet's gout. She had been refused at the front door that day, and sent round to the area steps, and the cook had snatched the flask and shut the door without a word. She had thought of that walk often since. She had thought she would not make it again. She made it now. She crossed Cheapside between a brewer's dray and a hackney, and the splash of mud rose to the hem of her skirt, and she did not stop. She kept her chin lifted. A girl with her chin lifted, her mother had once told her, is a girl no one accosts. Her mother had said many things which had turned out to be untrue, but this one Charity kept. The walk took her an hour and 3/4. By the time she came along the south side of Hanover Square, the sun had cleared the chimneys, and the white stucco of the great houses was almost painful to look at. Calthorpe House was the third from the corner. It had a portico of 4 columns, and above the portico a balustrade upon which 2 stone urns stood without their flowers. A barouche waited in the street, the horses drowsing in their traces, the coachman asleep with his hat tipped over his eyes. Charity did not approach the front steps. She went around to the area gate, lifted the latch, descended 6 iron steps to the servant's door, and rang the bell with one short pull. A footman opened. He was perhaps 17, very thin, with powdered hair the color of badly washed wool. He looked at her and threw her in the same glance. Tradesman at the back in the mews. I have brought the oil her ladyship requested. She showed the wrapped vial. Miss Pemberwick of Cheapside. He sniffed. He stood aside. Wait in the passage. Do not move from the mat. She did not move from the mat. The passage smelled of yesterday's mutton and of beeswax polish. Somewhere above, a pianoforte was being mistreated by a young hand, and a higher voice was laughing at the mistreatment, and a lower voice was joining in. Charity counted the brass tacks in the strip of carpet under her shoes. There were 27 down one side and 27 down the other. She had counted to 43 across the bottom when the footman returned. Her ladyship will receive you in the small drawing-room. Wipe your shoes. She wiped her shoes on the rough mat, twice on each foot. She wiped them a third time when she saw the marble of the back stair beyond the passage. The footman led her up 2 flights and along a corridor papered in a pattern of small pale birds, and stopped at a door painted the color of fresh cream, and opened it without knocking. The apothecary's daughter, my lady. The small drawing-room of Calthorpe House had a ceiling painted with cherubs that did not look kind, 3 tall windows hung with curtains of striped silk in a green that had begun to fade on the side nearest the light, and a fire that had been lit and was already too high for the warmth of the day. A spaniel slept on the hearthrug. The chairs were gilt in rose silk and arranged in an unfriendly semicircle. In the center of the semicircle, on the largest chair, sat Lady Augusta Calthorpe. She was a short woman, broad through the middle, with a face powdered very white and a small mouth painted very red, and a wart upon the chin, which the powder did not quite cover. Her hair was gray and built up in a great pile, and dressed at this hour of the morning with 3 purple ostrich plumes, which Charity thought a remarkable choice for 11 o'clock. To her right stood her elder daughter Lavinia, 22, and slender as a willow wand, in a morning gown of ivory muslin with pearl buttons up the back. To her left stood Harriet, 19, in pink, with sandy ringlets dusted with powder over the freckles she could not lose. Charity dropped a small curtsy, neither too low nor too brief. My lady. Miss Calthorpe, Miss Harriet, the rose oil, distilled this week, as her ladyship requested. She set the wrapped vial upon the small table near Lady Augusta's elbow. She stepped back to the proper distance. She lowered her eyes and waited. Open it, said Lady Augusta. Charity opened the linen, unwrapped the vial, set it upright upon the table, and stepped back again. Lady Augusta did not look at the vial. She looked at Charity. She looked at Charity for a long moment that drew itself out longer than a courtesy required, and at the end of the looking she said, mildly, Lavinia, show our visitor your bracelet. Lavinia smiled. It was a small smile, of the kind which is practiced in a glass. She extended her wrist, on which there was a fine gold chain with 5 sapphires set close, and she held it out toward Charity, as one might hold something out to a dog one was not certain of. Pretty, is it not? Said Lavinia. Mamma gave it me at Christmas. It is very pretty, Charity said. Touch it, said Harriet. She came nearer, eyes bright. Touch the stones. Tell me if you can feel that they are real. Charity did not move. She kept her hands folded. I am not a judge of stones, Miss Harriet. Oh, but you must be, said Harriet. Your trade is full of little vials and little crystals and little knives. Surely you can tell sapphire from glass. My trade is full of camphor and chamomile, Miss Harriet. I am not a jeweler. Lady Augusta let the silence settle. The spaniel on the hearthrug sighed in its sleep and turned its belly to the fire. A clock upon the mantel struck the quarter and was the only sound. Lavinia, said Lady Augusta, very pleasantly, where is the pearl drop? Lavinia's smile did not move. Mamma, I cannot find it. I have not been able to find it since yesterday afternoon. Since yesterday afternoon, repeated Lady Augusta. And who was in this room yesterday afternoon? The girl from the milliner's, said Harriet helpfully. And the girl from the glove-maker's. And no one else, Mamma. No one else at all. And what time, said Lady Augusta, did you send for the rose oil? At 4 o'clock yesterday, Mamma. And who delivered it, Mamma? Asked Lavinia, very softly. This person, said Lady Augusta, has delivered it now. Charity understood then. It was not a slow understanding. It was as clean and as sudden as the snap of a glass stem in the hand. She did not move. She did not lower her eyes further. She raised them, instead, and she looked at Lady Augusta directly. My lady, she said, I have not been in this room before today. I have not touched any pearl. I came up the back stair 8 minutes ago. The footman can speak to it. The footman, said Lady Augusta, will speak to what I tell him to speak to. Harriet laughed, a small bright laugh, and put her hand into a small silk reticule at her wrist and brought out a fistful of coins and tossed them in a thin scatter onto the marble of the hearthstone. The coins rang upon the marble, shillings mostly, a half-crown. They rolled and turned and settled. There, said Harriet, there is your fee for the oil. Pick it up, girl. Pick it up off the floor. Charity did not look at the coins. She did not look at Harriet. She looked at Lady Augusta and waited. Pick them up, said Lavinia. Charity did not move. Lady Augusta set her white hand upon the arm of her chair. A commoner, she said, in her mild and pleasant voice, does not belong here. A commoner does not stand. A commoner stoops when she is told to stoop. Stoop, child. The floor is clean. It was washed this morning. Charity drew one slow breath. Her hand at her side opened and closed and opened. The button at her waist in the small twice-tied pocket lay warm against her hip. She thought of her mother's voice. She thought of her father's hands. She thought of a black sleeve in an alley and a low voice that had said, "Do not look back." She thought of none of these things in words. She thought of them in the way that the body thinks, which is faster than language and harder to undo. She did not stoop. She inclined her head to Lady Augusta, the precise courteous inch that a tradesman owes a viscountess and no more. She said, I am not a transaction, my lady. The oil is upon the table. The bill will follow by the post. She turned. She walked toward the door. The coins lay where Harriet had thrown them, and she did not look at them, and her step did not check. She had taken 3 paces when she became aware of the figure at the top of the great stair beyond the open door. What she did not see, because her eyes were upon the door, was the look that passed between Lady Augusta and Lavinia in that instant. It was a brief look. It contained a question and an answer, and the answer was a small private satisfaction, as of a wager already paid. Lady Augusta's white hand moved upon the arm of her chair, and Lavinia's smile thinned, and the spaniel on the rug lifted its head, as if it had heard the latch of a gate it had not expected. Harriet, who saw nothing, kept her hand in her reticule and her eyes upon the coins that were not being picked up, and waited for the moment to grow funnier than it was already. It did not grow funnier. It grew, instead, very still. The clock upon the mantel struck the half. The fire in the grate spat once, sharply, and then was silent. Somewhere down the passage a maid laughed and was hushed. He was tall. He was very tall, and very still, and entirely in black, with a coat of black velvet whose cuffs and collar were worked in dull gold thread that caught no light. His waistcoat was brocade of a deep dull gold, with buttons that might have been amethyst. His cravat was a fall of white silk pinned with a sapphire as large as a thumbnail. His hair was black and brushed back from a brow which carried, Above the left eyebrow, a thin white scar that did not so much mar the face as finish it. His eyes were the color of cold steel and rested upon Lady Augusta with an attention so quiet that it had the weight of a placed hand. He had not been there a quarter of an hour ago. He had not been announced. He stood in the doorframe as if he had been carved into the paneling, and he had been watching, Charity understood, for some time. Lady Augusta saw him. The white powder on her face did not whiten further, because it could not. The small red mouth opened and opened again. Lavinia's hand flew to the pearl at her own throat. Harriet stepped back into the curtain. "My lord," said Lady Augusta, "my lord Marquess, we did not know. We were not informed." The Marquess of Ardley did not speak. He did not move. His eyes left Lady Augusta and traveled, without haste, to the coins upon the hearthstone, and from the coins to the vial of rose oil upon the table, and from the vial to the girl in the brown shawl who stood now at the threshold with her chin lifted and her hand at her waist. His gaze rested upon Charity's face. It rested for the length of one slow breath, and then another. Something moved at the corner of his mouth which was not quite a smile, and was not anything kind. He inclined his head to her, 1 precise inch, the courtesy of a peer of the realm to a lady of consequence. Then he set one gloved hand upon the polished rail of the great stair, and began, without a word, to come down. Each tread of the great staircase took the weight of him without sound. The marble had been polished that morning by a girl who was now hiding behind the green baize door, and even she, peeking through the crack, forgot to breathe. The Marquess of Ardley descended as a man descends into his own house. His gloved hand never left the rail. His eyes never left Charity Pemberwick. She had not moved. The little vial of rose oil lay on the checkered floor between her foot and Lavinia's slipper, untouched by either of them. The stopper had rolled an inch. A thin ribbon of scent climbed up through the cold air of the hall and reached the chandelier before anyone in that house spoke again. Lady Augusta Calthorpe found her tongue first. She always did. "My lord." She sank into a curtsy that was both deep and quick, the trick of a woman who had practiced it on 3 reigns. "Forgive us. A most disagreeable scene. A common creature, attempting to—" "Madam." The single word stopped her throat as cleanly as a hand laid across it. He did not raise his voice. He never did. The men who served under him in the peninsula had said, in the warmth of taverns afterwards, that Lascelles in the field gave his orders softer the worse things grew, and that one learned to listen for the softness as for the click of a flintlock cocked at the ear. Lady Augusta had never been on a battlefield, but she heard it now. She closed her mouth. He had reached the bottom of the stair. He stood upon the checkered marble. The light from the tall windows above struck the bullion at his shoulder and laid a clean gold line down his sleeve. He looked, for a moment, only at the vial on the floor. Then he bent. It was so simple a movement that no one understood it at first. The Marquess of Ardley, who had not, by report, bent for anything since the king's own coronation, lowered himself on one knee upon the marble of Calthorpe House, and gathered the little blue glass into his gloved palm, as though it were a fallen ring of state. Harriet Calthorpe made a small noise like a hiccup. He rose and held the vial out to Charity. "I believe, madam, this is yours." She did not take it. She could not. Her right hand, the one that had been struck when the housekeeper, Mrs. Pinder, had slapped the basket from her arm, was trembling so plainly that she had hidden it inside the fold of her shawl. She would not bring it into the light to be seen. He saw the hidden hand. He saw, too, the welt along the inside of her wrist where the basket's hempen handle had cut when it was torn from her. He saw the bonnet pushed askew, the lace cap beneath it slipped over one ear, the smear of mud on the hem of the clouded buff gown where she had knelt in the kitchen yard to gather the spilled bottles. He noted these things in the order a surgeon notes wounds, swiftly, without expression, and put them away in the iron box behind his ribs to be answered for later. "Take it," he said, softer still. She brought out the trembling hand. He set the vial into her palm and, with a deliberation that turned every face in the hall toward him, closed her cold fingers around it with his own gloved hand. He did not let go at once. The pressure was steady. It was, she realized, the pressure of a man holding a thing in place that wished to fall. She could not look at his face. She looked at his wrist, where the gold thread at the cuff caught the light, and at the signet ring upon his small finger, and at nothing else in the world. Lavinia recovered her voice. My lord, you do not understand. The creature came here under false pretense. She has been pilfering. Miss Calthorpe. He did not turn his head. You will be silent. Lavinia's mouth shaped a word and did not say it. The fan in her hand snapped shut against her palm. The sound was very loud. Now he turned, not to Lavinia, to Lady Augusta. He let the silence weigh upon the older woman until the powder upon her cheeks looked, in the cold spring light, like a thin frost beginning to crack. You said, madam, a moment past, that a commoner does not belong here. His tone was conversational, almost mild. Pray, repeat it. Lady Augusta's chin came up half an inch. The plume on her cap quivered. She had buried 2 husbands and outlived a regency of enemies, and she would not be cowed in her own hall. I observed only what is plain, my lord. The girl is not of our condition. We did not invite her. She presented herself at the tradesman's entrance with a basket of unguents, and the basket lay overturned at the foot of the stair, its bottles in a damp star around it, and was discovered with a sovereign upon her person, which is none of hers. A sovereign. He repeated the word as though testing the weight of a coin in his palm. Pray, where is this sovereign? My daughter cast it down upon the floor that the world might see. Where is it now? Harriet's eyes went, of themselves, to the small, bright disk lying near the foot of a marble plinth. The Marquess followed her glance. He did not bend a second time. He raised one finger no higher than his own waist. A footman in Calthorpe livery, who had not been spoken to, crossed the hall in 3 strides, picked up the coin, and brought it to him upon a salver that he had taken from the side table without instruction. The household of Calthorpe House, in that instant, decided whom it served. The Marquess took the coin. He did not look at it. He looked at Harriet. You threw this, Miss Harriet. Aye. Harriet's freckles, which the powder had been laid on to hide, came up red as wax. Mamma said, Your mamma did not throw it. You threw it. Coin upon marble makes a sound that carries far. You wished it to be heard. Harriet's eyes filled. She was 19 years old and she had never been spoken to in that voice in her life. He turned the sovereign once between his finger and thumb. The little crown winked. He held it up. This is a half-sovereign of the new coinage, struck this present year at the Royal Mint, of which my late father was a commissioner. It bears upon its face the likeness of His Majesty as Prince Regent. It bears upon its reverse St. George. There are, in the city of London at this hour, perhaps 600 such pieces in circulation. They have not yet been issued to the public. They are in the keeping of the bank and of certain houses to whom they have been delivered as test pieces. He paused. He looked, mildly, at Lady Augusta. My household received 6 such pieces upon Tuesday last. Lady Augusta's mouth opened a fraction. It did not speak. This coin, said the Marquess, still mild, was not in Miss Pemberwick's basket, because Miss Pemberwick stole it from your daughter's reticule. This coin was placed in Miss Pemberwick's basket from your daughter's reticule. The mistake, madam, was that you used a coin which had not yet been seen by any pocket in Cheapside. A girl who keeps a shop in the Old Change does not deal in test pieces of the mint. The half-sovereign is yours, or rather, it was. He set the coin upon the salver. The footmen, without instruction, did not move. The silence in the hall was now of a kind that has no air in it. Lavinia, whose color had been very high, went white in patches like a wall when the damp comes through. Harriet sat down upon the lower step of the great stair, as though her knees had forgotten her. Lady Augusta did not move at all. Charity Pemberwick understood, in that moment, 2 things. The first was that the woman in the turban of amaranth silk had not improvised the scene at the foot of the stair. The basket had not been ransacked by an idle housemaid. The coin had not fallen from a careless reticule. A daughter had thrown what a mother had placed, and a mother had placed it knowing that a stranger of the East End would be unable to account for a coin that no person east of Temple Bar had yet handled. It had been a precise, elegant little lie, prepared in the time between the parlor bell and the kitchen door. The second thing she understood was that the Marquess of Ardley had known this before he set foot upon the first stair. He had come down knowing. She lifted her eyes to his face for the first time. He was looking at her. What passed between them in that look did not pass in words. It was not, even, recognition. He had recognized her at the top of the staircase, 3 years too late and yet not too late. By a turn of the head she had given a man in a rainy alley off Bishopsgate when she had pressed a pewter button into his bleeding palm and said, "Keep it. It will keep you." He had spent 3 years looking for that button and for the hand that had given it. The look he gave her now was not the look of a man finding what he had sought. It was the look of a man who has found it and is, for the first time since he was a boy, afraid of losing it again within the hour. She looked away first. Her cheeks were very hot. He turned, then, to the household. Mrs. Pinder, the housekeeper who had struck Charity in the kitchen yard, stepped from a doorway with her hands folded over her apron as if to be inspected. "You will replace the bottles in this woman's basket. You will replace of your own purse those that are broken. You will do this within the half-hour, and you will do it upon your knees on the floor of this hall, which I observe you have caused to be the scene of an injury to a guest of this house." Mrs. Pinder began to weep without sound. "My lord," Lady Augusta tried once more. The plume of her turban shook now without her bidding. He raised his eyes to her. He did not speak to her. He spoke instead to Charity, but in such a manner that the whole hall heard. "Madam, you will permit me to set this matter in order. There is upon this floor a basket that is your property. There is upon this person," his glance grazed the half-sovereign on the salver, "a coin that is not. There is upon your wrist a hurt that ought never to have been done. I would have you understand that none of these wrongs will stand. I have the honor to be Marquess of Ardley. I have the inconvenience, this morning, of being also a witness. The latter office I shall discharge before the former." He inclined his head to her, as one inclines to a peer. "Will you do me the kindness," he said, "of waiting in the small parlor while I speak briefly with our hostess?" She did not trust her voice. She made a curtsy. It was the curtsy of a Cheapside girl to a great gentleman, neither too low nor too brief, and the steadiness of it, after what her hands had just done, was the first thing she had to be proud of that day. A maid appeared at her elbow, dispatched by no visible signal, and curtsied also, and led her toward a door at the side of the hall. As Charity passed beneath the great chandelier, she did not look back. She heard, behind her, the Marquess speak again, very low, and she heard Lady Augusta begin to answer, and she heard Lady Augusta stop. The door of the small parlor closed. In the hall, he did not raise his voice. "Madam," he said, "you will sit." Lady Augusta sat. She sat upon a settle of carved oak that had been in her family since the second Charles, and she sat with her hands folded as a child folds them upon a slate, and she did not know that her hands had done it. Miss Lavinia, Miss Harriet. The two girls came down the stair without being told. Harriet was crying. Lavinia was not. Lavinia's eyes had grown narrow with calculation. Already, behind that white face, she was rearranging the story, fitting it to a shape in which the Marquess of Ardley had been deceived by a designing creature out of Cheapside, and a great house had merely tried, in the natural exercise of its duty, to protect him. He saw the calculation. He let her finish it. Then he spoke. "There is a matter," he said, "of certain bills of yours, madam, which are held by gentlemen of my acquaintance in the city. The figure to last quarter day was something above £11,000. I am informed that the gentlemen in question have grown impatient. They have, I gather, been considering whether the holding of those obligations is any longer convenient to them. I have, for some little time, been minded to relieve them of the inconvenience." Lady Augusta's pupils contracted to 2 points. "I should mention," he went on, in the same conversational tone, "that the lease of this house, which your late husband held of my own estate of Ardley, falls in upon Michaelmas. It has been my intention to renew it, as a matter of courtesy to a neighbor. I find now that it shall be a question, rather, of judgment than of courtesy." He paused. "You will receive, madam, before nightfall, a card from my man of business, Mr. Fane, in Lincoln's Inn. You will, with your daughters, do him the favor of waiting upon him at his office at 10 of the clock tomorrow morning. You will bring with you the household book of this house for the past 3 quarters. You will bring also the inventory of plate. You will not, tonight, dismiss the housekeeper, Mrs. Pinder. She will remain in your service, that she may be present when Mr. Fane begins his inquiries. You understand me?" It was not a question. She understood him. "And the girl," she said, with the last of the voice she had brought down from her bedchamber that morning. "The girl, my lord." "The lady," he said, "is not a matter for your understanding." He bowed to her then, the precise inch he had earlier inclined to Charity at the head of the stair, and turned upon his heel, and the silver star upon his breast caught the cold light from the window above as he walked the length of the checkered marble toward the door of the small parlor. His hand was upon the latch when he paused. He turned back to the salver upon which the half-sovereign lay. He did not pick the coin up. He looked at it as a man looks at a piece of evidence already in the keeping of the court. Then he looked at the footman who held the salver, and the footman, who had been 20 years in Calthorpe's service, understood that he had a new master from this hour, and would, in the course of a fortnight, be paid better wages for cleaner work. The Marquess went into the small parlor. Charity was standing at the window. She had not sat. Her back was to the door, and her hand, the bruised one, was pressed flat against the cold pane, as though the glass were the only solid thing in the house. When she heard the door, she did not turn at once. She drew the hand down and tucked it into her shawl. Then she turned. He shut the door behind him with his own hand. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he crossed the carpet to her, and he stopped at the proper distance of a stranger, and he removed his right glove finger by finger, and laid it upon the small table at her elbow. "Madam," he said, "I have been looking for you for 3 years." She did not understand him. He saw that she did not. He took, then, from the breast of his coat, a small object wrapped in a square of fine cambric. He opened the cambric upon his bare palm and held it out to her. Lying on his palm was a pewter button. It was the button she had pressed into a bleeding stranger's hand in an alley off Bishopsgate when she was 18 years old, and the stranger had been a man whose face she had not seen, only the dark shape of him against the lamp, only the warmth of the blood through the linen she had used as a bandage, only the voice that had said, when she had refused payment, "Then give me a thing of yours, that I may know you again." She had torn the pewter button from her own cloak. She had pressed it into his palm. She had said, "Keep it. It will keep you." Then she had run. She looked at the button upon his palm. She looked at his face. She understood, at last, why he had come down the stair. The brass button sat upon his open palm, scratched, common, and worn smooth by 3 years of being carried. Charity did not move. The marble hall had gone so quiet that she could hear the soft hiss of the coal in the distant grate, and the small, betrayed breath caught in Lady Augusta's throat. Constantine Lascelles, Marquess of Ardleigh, remained on one knee before her. He did not rise to soften the picture. He let the household see him there, on the cold marble, at the feet of a girl in a clouded buff gown with a torn hem. He turned his hand a fraction so the button caught the light from the chandelier above. It was not a jewel. It was a small, blackened, ordinary thing, and it was, at that moment, the most powerful object in the room. "I have looked for the owner of this for 3 years," he said. His voice was low. It carried. It was not for her alone. Lavinia made a choked sound that wished to be a laugh and could not. Harriet's hand fluttered to her cherry bow and fell back. Lady Augusta's painted mouth shaped a syllable. No sound emerged. The white lead powder upon her cheek had begun, faintly, to crack. Charity lifted her chin a fraction. She did not yet speak. She had not been given permission to be in this house, and habit kept her silent. But habit was already loosening its grip, finger by finger, and she could feel it go. "Stand," the Marquess said softly. He was not speaking to her. He was speaking to himself. He rose without haste, the way a man rises from prayer. The black velvet of his coat fell into place. The 2 service medals settled against the carmine ribbon with a faint, ceremonial chime. He did not look at Lady Augusta. He looked only at Charity. "You will permit me," he said, "to escort you from this house." It was not a question. It was not a command. It was an offer extended with such absolute, courteous certainty that to refuse it would have been to break the world. The corner of his gray eye flickered, the faintest movement, and she understood, in that small flicker, that he was afraid she would refuse him. She did not. She inclined her head. The plain straw bonnet, faded ribbon and all, dipped once. "Thank you, my lord." Those were the first words she had spoken since she crossed the threshold of Calthorpe House, and they seemed to take the air out of Lady Augusta entirely. The Viscountess sank a half-inch into her purple silk, as though something within the stays had given way. The Marquess turned, and the household turned with him, helpless as iron filings before a lodestone. The under-footman who had been instructed to bar the door fell back without being told. The butler, who a quarter-hour earlier had spoken of constables, now bent at the waist and remained bent. A scullery maid on the servant's stair pressed her apron to her mouth. He offered Charity his arm. She had never, in 21 years of life, taken a gentleman's arm. Her hand, red from soap and pestle, hovered for the breadth of a heartbeat. Then she laid her fingertips upon the black velvet of his sleeve, very lightly, as one might lay a leaf upon still water. The Marquess did not betray, by the smallest tightening of his jaw, that he had felt it. But he had. The cicatrice above his left brow whitened a fraction, and that was all. They walked the length of the hall together. He shortened his step to hers with the patience of a horseman gentling a wary creature. At the door he paused. "Hugh," he said, without turning his head. Mr. Hugh Fane, who had stood throughout in the shadow of a pilaster like a slender gray heron, stepped forward at once, the leather case under his arm. "My lord, you will remain. You will note the names of every person present in this hall. You will note the words spoken before my arrival. You will note, in particular, the matter of 3 sovereigns flung upon a marble floor." "My lord," said Hugh Fane, and bowed. Harriet Calthorpe began, very quietly, to cry. The Marquess did not look at her. He guided Charity through the doorway, and behind them Hugh Fane drew out a small notebook bound in black calf and opened it to a fresh page, and the sound of his pencil, when it began, was the only sound in the hall. Outside, the spring rain had ceased. The flagstones shone like wet slate. A groom held 2 matched bays, and old Tom, in his brown greatcoat and checked scarf, sat upon the box. The carriage was lacquered so deeply black it seemed to drink the gray afternoon, the panels picked out in burnished gold. A coronet over a hawk in flight had been painted upon the door. The Marquess opened the door himself. He did not wait for the footman. "Mind the step," he said. The interior was midnight velvet, cushions stitched in gold. Charity sat very straight, boots placed precisely together, as though to take up the least possible amount of someone else's world. The Marquess took the seat opposite, not beside her, and this courtesy did not escape her. Old Tom clucked to the bays. The carriage moved. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The rolled-back curtain showed, in fragments, the white columns of Calthorpe House receding, the iron railings, a knot of servants clustered at an upper window, then the streets of Mayfair, the lamplighters not yet at their work, an apple seller pushing a barrow through the wet, a great house, giving its first lighted window to the dusk. "My lord," Charity said at last. "Lascelles," he said. "Constantine, if you will allow it, but Lascelles will do." "My lord," she said again, gently, and he inclined his head, accepting the boundary. "I am not, I think, properly anyone's guest." She kept her voice low, even. "I came to Calthorpe House because Lady Augusta sent for a tincture. I am, my lord, in your debt for the rescue. I cannot remain in it. If you will set me down at the corner of Cheapside, I will walk home from there and trouble you no further." The Marquess looked at her. He looked at her for a long moment, with a stillness that another woman might have mistaken for displeasure. He was, in truth, memorizing her. The precise shade of gray-blue in her eyes, the wisp of hair at her temple, the way she sat with her work-roughened hands folded as one folds a knife away. "No," he said. It was a small word, said without heat. It was, however, an answer to a great many things, and she understood that. "My lord, there is a matter of debt, Miss Pemberwick. You have correctly named it. The debt, however, is mine." The carriage rocked gently over a runnel in the road. The lamps of a passing chair flickered upon the velvet wall, then were gone. "3 years ago," he said, in an alley off Threadneedle Street, a girl came round a corner with a basket on her arm. There were 3 men, and a 4th on the ground. The girl did not run. She set the basket down. She drew from her apron a small phial of oil of vitriol, and she said, very clearly, that she would empty it upon the first hand that touched her. The men chose to believe her. They went away. Charity sat very still. The man on the ground, the Marquess said, had been struck upon the temple. He could not, for an hour, recall his own name. The first name he recovered was hers. The boy at the chop-house door had called her Miss Charity. He inquired after that name for 3 years. A muscle moved, once, in his jaw. Not openly, A peer who is known to be searching for a young woman in Cheapside becomes, very quickly, a person of ridicule. He inquired through Hugh Fane, apothecaries' guilds, parish registers, the books of the worshipful company. He found her at last 6 weeks ago, in a ledger of distilled waters delivered to Lady Calthorpe's house. He called there today on a small matter of estate business, in the certain knowledge that the apothecary's girl would be present, and that he might at last set eyes upon her without raising the very ridicule he had taken 3 years to avoid. The carriage turned a corner. The dusk was deepening into proper evening. He did not, my lord, Charity said quietly, expect to find her accused of theft upon a marble floor. No, said the Marquess, he did not. He drew a small breath. The waterfall of white silk at his throat rose and fell once. For which oversight he owes you a second apology, and a great many more besides. You owe me nothing, my lord. I owe you my life, Miss Pemberwick. The flat statement, made without flourish, sat between them in the velvet dark like a heavy coin laid upon a table. I had supposed, she said, that you were a gentleman delayed in his way home. I was a gentleman who, but for you, would have been delivered home upon a hurdle, possibly dead, certainly ruined. The men in that alley had been paid in coin, which I have since traced to a hand I will, in time, attend to. Her grey-blue eyes lifted to his. My lord, she said, what is it you wish of me? The Marquess of Ardley did not answer at once. The bay's hooves rang upon a stretch of fresh paving. A link boy ran by with a flaring torch, and for a moment the inside of the carriage glowed amber, and she saw, with great clarity, the fine cicatrice above his left brow, and the unguarded thing in his eyes that he would not, for any sum on earth, have named aloud. For the present, he said, your safety. And after the present? After the present, Miss Pemberwick, what you yourself wish. She did not answer. She looked, instead, at her own hands. They were very red. The knuckles were chapped from lye. There was a faint stain of rose oil along the side of one thumb. She had carried the button of a man she had presumed dead for 3 years in her apron pocket, against every counsel of sense, because she had not been able, in 3 years, to put it down. You may set me down, my lord, she said, at the door of my father's shop. I will set you down, Miss Pemberwick, at the door of Ardley House. My sister Lady May keeps it. She is an invalid. She has wished for company these many years, and will be glad of yours for one night. Your father will be informed within the hour. By a written hand he will know to be honest, of where you are and why. My lord, you will be my sister's guest, not mine. Mrs. Carstairs will see to your comfort. The door of your chamber will lock from the inside, and the key will be in your hand. In the morning you will decide whether to remain a day, a week, or to be driven home at first light. The choice will be yours. He paused. I do not ask. I offer. The asking, if it ever comes, will come upon terms which you yourself will write. There was no answer to be made to such a speech that her station had taught her. Her station had taught her how to refuse coin, how to refuse advances, how to refuse pity. It had not taught her how to refuse a debt of honor pressed upon her by a man who knelt twice in one afternoon, once upon a marble floor, and once, invisibly, in the velvet dark of his own coach. She inclined her head. For one night, my lord, and in the morning I will write to my father in my own hand. It shall be as you say. She turned her face to the window. London slid past. She thought of her father at the counter in Cheapside, weighing dried lavender, looking up each time the bell rang. None of those things had altered. She had altered, in a single afternoon, beyond any return. The carriage turned in at a pair of iron gates set with a hawk in flight. A long sweep of gravel curved between rows of lime trees. Ardley House rose ahead, pale stone, a great pediment, 12 tall windows lit against the evening, footmen with torches descending the steps before the carriage had stopped. Mrs. Carstairs herself was at the door. Black bombazine, white starched cap, the chain of silver keys at her broad waist. She did not blink at the clouded buff gown, nor at the torn hem, nor at the apron stained with rose oil. She curtsied as deeply as she would have curtsied to a duchess. Miss Pemberwick, Lady May has been informed. A fire is laid in the blue chamber. A hot bath will be sent up. Supper at your pleasure. Charity, descending upon the Marquess's hand, found that her knees would carry her after all. She inclined her head. Thank you, Mrs. Carstairs. The Marquess did not enter with her. He gave her hand into Mrs. Carstairs' keeping at the door, bowed once, and stepped back into the courtyard, where Hugh Fane had appeared, on horseback, out of the dusk. Hugh, my lord, Calthorpe House, every name, every word, tonight. It is done, my lord. I returned by the back lane. Begin upon the debts. A small dry pause. They are begun, my lord. They were begun 3 years ago. The Marquess looked for one instant at the lighted window above the portico, where a slender figure in clouded buff was being shown into a room she did not yet know. Then he turned his grey eyes upon his man of business. Buy them all. By the second week, the Blue Chamber had begun to know her. The hot bath was no longer a marvel. The clean linen no longer crackled like new paper to her fingers. Lady May's wheeled chair, of woven wicker and polished mahogany, found Charity each morning in the orangery, and the two of them sat among the lemon trees with a tray of weak tea between them, and spoke of distillations, of headaches, of the politics of the parish poor. Lady May's grey steel eyes, so like her brother's, were warmer than his by a degree of patient sun, and she did not, by a single delicate question, intrude upon why a girl in a clouded buff gown should be the guest of Ardley House. The clouded buff gown had gone, the second morning, into the keeping of a lady's maid, and returned mended invisibly along the hem. Charity wore, instead, a plain morning dress of pale grey muslin, a gift, she was told, from Lady May, ordered 3 sizes too large a season ago and never worn. The lie was kindly. She accepted it. Her father had answered, "Stay where thou art safe, daughter. The shop keeps. Mind thy honor, and write each Sunday." She kept the letter folded in her sleeve. The Marquess she saw, each day, for 1/2 hour before dinner. He did not come to her in the morning. He did not loiter in the orangery. He was, she gathered without being told, riding at dawn into the city, sitting until noon with Hugh Fane over papers, attending the lords in the afternoon, and returning at 6 to bathe and to dress and to descend, in his black velvet and gold, to the drawing-room, where his sister and his guest awaited him. He bowed to Charity each evening as though she were a duchess. He asked after her day. He listened, with that grey, unsmiling attention, to her small reports. A new recipe for a cough syrup tried upon a kitchen maid, a passage she had read in his sister's copy of Cowper, and he replied, briefly, intelligently, and without flourish. He did not touch her hand. He did not, after that first afternoon, kneel before her again. He had set the precedent and withdrawn from it, as though to say, "I have shown you what I am. The next step is yours, in your own time." She found, by the 5th evening, that she was looking for him at 6 o'clock. She found by the 10th that she had begun, very quietly, to mend. A small parlor had been given over to her work. A scrubbed deal table, a brass mortar sent up by her father's apprentice, a copper alembic from a still room unused since the late Marchioness's day. Charity worked there 2 hours each afternoon, rose oil, lavender water, a tincture of valerian for Lady May's sleepless nights. Mrs. Carstairs reported the second housemaid's whitlow healed in 3 days, the cook's son's cough a memory, the dairyman's old mare saved by linseed and honey. The household began to look upon the apothecary's daughter with the slow, durable approval of a great kitchen that has decided a stranger is useful and may therefore stay. In the second week she went into the village upon Lady May's errand. A woman at a cottage door, not knowing who she was, called her "My lady." By mistake, Charity corrected her gently. She walked back under the lime trees and did not feel, as she had feared, like a player in a stolen costume. She felt as though her hands were doing the work they were meant to do, in a place they were meant to do it. She returned to find a great square envelope upon the silver salver in the hall, addressed in a hand she did not know. Mrs. Carstairs lifted her brows a 1/4 inch. "From Calthorpe House, miss." Charity took the envelope between her fingers. The paper was thick. The seal was Lady Augusta's, pressed in violet wax, very neatly done. She did not open it in the hall. She carried it to the small parlor, where the rose oil was condensing in the copper alembic, and she set it upon the deal table beside the row of files, and she looked at it for a long time without breaking the seal. In the door behind her, unheard, the Marquess of Ardley stood and watched her watch the envelope. He had come back early, by a 1/4 of an hour, on an instinct he did not name. He saw her shoulders square beneath the gray muslin. He saw her hand reach out and, very deliberately, set the envelope face down. He saw her turn back to the alembic, adjust the wick of the small spirit lamp by a fraction, and resume her work. He did not at that moment enter the room. He stepped back, soundless upon the carpet, and closed the door with the care of a man closing the door of a sick room in which the patient has, against all expectation, begun to heal. In the corridor he stood for a moment with one hand upon the wood, and his gray eyes, when he lifted them at last, were no longer the eyes of a man calculating a debt. He went, by the small stair, to find Hugh Fane. Behind him, in the parlor, Charity Pemberwick turned the envelope face up again and broke the violet seal. Hugh Fane stood at the long library window with his back to the door, watching a thrush hop along the frost-bitten gravel of the south terrace. He had heard the small stair groan. He had been waiting for it. When the Marquess entered, Fane did not turn at once. He let his employer cross the carpet, hear the fire, and feel the weight of the silence that always preceded the worst of his counsel. "You read the seal," the Marquess said. "I read the seal. Speak." Fane turned. His thin face was composed, but his fingers tightened on the leather portfolio under his arm, and that was as close to alarm as Hugh Fane permitted himself. "My lord, the trap was laid before she ever walked through the gate." Constantine Lascelles, Marquess of Ardleigh, did not sit. He went to the long table where a map of his Yorkshire estates lay weighted with 4 small lions of brass, and he set one palm flat upon the parchment as though to keep himself attached to the earth. "Begin at the beginning, Hugh. Spare nothing." Fane opened the portfolio. He laid out 3 letters, a bill of hire, and a folded sheet of cheap printer's foolscap that smelled, even at that distance, of tallow and ink. "Lady Augusta Calthorpe," he said quietly, "did not summon the girl yesterday by accident. The order to attend Calthorpe House with the rose oil was forwarded through a clerk at Apothecary's Hall who has been in her ladyship's purse since Michaelmas. The amount entered against her name in his private book is 20 guineas. For one order. For one order, and for what was to follow it." Fane touched the foolscap. This was to be printed within the hour. 300 copies, distributed at the coffee houses about St. James and at the colonnade of the Opera. I purchased the typesetter's silence on my way back through Holborn. The plates are in my desk. The Marquess did not move. "Read it." Fane unfolded the sheet. His voice was even, the voice of a man reading a deed. "To the gentle public, it is with sorrow that the friends of the most honorable the Marquess of Ardleigh make known a strange affliction that has overtaken his lordship since the spring of the year 12. His lordship, once the ornament of the lords and the steady hand of the Foreign Office, has been observed walking the alleys of Cheapside in the small hours, seeking a girl said to deal in philtres and sleeping waters. Yesterday at Calthorpe House, the said person was apprehended in the act of theft, whereupon his lordship, in a paroxysm of feeling, did kneel upon the marble before her and kiss her hand. We submit, with the deepest regret, that a guardian of the king's interest who has so far forgotten himself can no longer be trusted with the seals of state, nor with the management of his own affairs. Fane folded the paper again. The fire spoke in the silence. "There is a second leaf," he said, naming 5 physicians who would be willing, for a consideration, to sign a writ of lunacy in the Court of Chancery. 3 of them dine at Lady Augusta's table. The Marquess lifted his hand from the map. The 4 brass lions held the parchment without him. "And the girl." "The girl was the bait, my lord. The summons brought her. The dropped coins gave the accusation. The kneeling was foreseen. Her ladyship has watched you these 3 seasons. Once the broadsheet was printed, the kneeling becomes the proof. A great gentleman bewitched, a scheming creature of the East End. The Lord Chancellor's clerk receives the petition by Friday. By Lady Day you sit in no house, and Ardleigh is administered by a board of which her ladyship's brother is the chair. My sister, Lady May, would be removed to Brighton for her health. The board would appoint her companions." The Marquess turned then, slowly, and walked to the fire. He stood with his back to Fane and looked into the coals. The cicatrice above his left brow caught the red light and showed white. "She knew I would kneel. She knew, my lord, that you have knelt to no one in your life, and that, having knelt once, you would not deny it. She used the girl as one uses a snare. She used the girl, and she used you. The Calthorpe debts at 3 banks come due in March. A board of administration takes a commission of 4% on the estate. The arithmetic is plain. A coal fell. The Marquess did not start. "Bring me Mrs. Carstairs," he said at last, "and then return." Fane bowed and went. The Marquess remained where he was for a long moment, looking not at the fire, but at his own hand laid upon the marble of the chimney-piece. The signet caught the light. He had worn it 22 years. It had never felt heavier. In the parlor above, Charity Pemberwick sat very still upon the small green chair to which Mrs. Carstairs had led her, and read the letter for the 3rd time. The hand was a lady's, taught at a good seminary, careful and a little vain. The violet seal had borne the Calthorpe crest, and that crest she had broken with the edge of her thumbnail without ceremony. The paper, as she turned it, gave off the faintest scent of bergamot. She had read it once for the words. She had read it twice for what lay beneath the words. The 3rd reading was for the small things, the hurried loop at the end of ruined, the blot beside the date, the smudge where a tear had perhaps been pressed and perhaps only feigned. "My dear Miss Pemberwick, for I think, in this hour, I may call you that, you will by now have been made to know that yesterday's shame was not yours, but mine. My mother contrived the moment from the day Mr. Lascelles last refused my sister at the frost ball. She wished to humble him through you, and to humble you because she could. I am her daughter, and I knew, and I said nothing. For this I cannot ask your pardon, only your understanding that a daughter of such a mother is also, in her way, a small prisoner. I write to warn you. There is more than yesterday. There are sheets to be printed. There are physicians to be bought. There is a writ to be sworn. By Friday next, if no hand stops it, the Marquess will be declared unfit, and you will be named a poisoner in every coffee house in town. The Bow Street officers will come for you in your shop, and there will be no apothecary to take your part, for my mother has bought the hall. Go, I beg you, while you may. Take what kindness has been offered, and use it to vanish. The country is wide. London forgets a face if the face is not before it. I sign with the only name that is wholly mine, Lavinia." Charity folded the letter once, and once again, until it was a small white square no larger than a snuff paper. She set it upon her knee. She looked at her hands. They were red still from the morning's pestle. The knuckle of her right thumb bore the small white scar of a glass cut from the winter she had been 14. There was a faint stain of rose oil between the 1st and 2nd fingers that no scrubbing ever quite took out. She had been called many things in her life. Boticaria, girl, witch, once, by a drunk near Bishopsgate, and she had only laughed. Poisoner she had not been called. She rose. She went to the window. The garden lay gray under a thin sun, and a thrush sat upon the gravel as if it were the only honest creature for a mile. "Run," the letter said. She set her palm against the cold pane. She thought of the shop, the small green door, the brass weights her father had polished every Sunday until they shone like new sovereigns. She thought of the room above it where her mother had died, of the painted board across the lintel, Pemberwick, apothecary, Est 1789. She thought of the lavender she had set out in the yard, only beginning to put up its gray leaves. A daughter of such a mother is also, in her way, a small prisoner. She thought, too, of the marble of yesterday, and of a man going down upon one knee before the whole house, and of the brass button in her pocket, gone now, given up to the lacquered tray, and yet not gone, for she felt the weight of it still. Below stairs, the small stair groaned again. Mrs. Carstairs came to the parlor door and curtsied with that economical bend of the knee proper to a governess housekeeper who has buried 2 mistresses. "His lordship asks if you will join him in the library, miss, when you are ready. There is no haste." Charity turned from the window. Mrs. Carstairs. "Miss, was the broadsheet to be printed today?" The housekeeper's face did not alter. "Mr. Fane has prevented it, miss. There will be no broadsheet today." "And tomorrow?" "Mr. Fane is presently considering tomorrow." Charity inclined her head. She put the folded letter into the small pocket sewn at the waist of her gown, beside the place where the button had lain. "I shall come down," she said. The library was warm. The Marquess stood at the long table over a map she could not read, and Hugh Fane stood at his shoulder with the leather portfolio open. They looked up together when she entered, and the looking up was not the looking up of a great house at a guest. It was the looking up of 2 men who had been waiting for the third party at a council of war. Miss Pemberwick, the Marquess said, sit, if you please. She did not sit. She came to the table. I have read Lady Lavinia's letter, she said. Do you tell me, my lord, whether what it says is true? Fane glanced at the Marquess. The Marquess did not look away from her. It is true, he said. All of it. All of it. The print shop, the physicians, the petition. The Calthorpes intended that by Sunday I should not be master here, and that you should be a name shouted in the street. And the kneeling, yesterday, in the hall, was foreseen. She nodded once, as a clerk nods when a column is summed. My lord, she said, I should like to know one thing more, and you will pardon the asking. The button you sent your man to look for, 3 years gone, was that also foreseen? The Marquess set both hands upon the table. The cicatrice did not move. No, he said. That was a debt. The debt was mine. The button was the token of it. There was no scheme in the looking. There was a man who could not sleep at night, who had a face in his memory and did not know its name. And yesterday, when you came down the stair, yesterday, I came down because a woman of my house was being called a thief upon my marble. The kneeling was not a scheme. It was a thing I would have done in any house in England. She held his eyes a moment longer. Then she turned to Hugh Fane. Mr. Fane, the broadsheet. In my desk, miss. The plates also. The printer, paid to lose his memory. The physicians. 3 dine at her ladyship's. 2 we can reach today. The petition. Cannot be sworn without a deposition. The deposition was to have been Lady Augusta's. She will not swear it now without protection, and the protection she counted on was the broadsheet. We have removed the broadsheet. For today, Charity laid her palm flat upon the map beside the Marquess's. Her hand looked small there, and red, and very steady. Then today, she said, is enough. She lifted her hand. She turned to the Marquess. My lord, Lady Lavinia bids me run. The country, she says, is wide. I have a shop in Cheapside, and a board above its door, with my father's name. I have a mortar that was my grandmother's. I have a yard with lavender in it. If I run, those things become hers, or her mother's, or the Crown's, by the operation of debt and silence. If I stay, I am called a poisoner in every coffee-house in town, and by Friday next a writ is sworn against your reason, and a board sits at your table. Yes, then I do not run, and you do not sit upon a board. No. Then we have a quarrel with Calthorpe House. We have. What does a quarrel with Calthorpe House look like, my lord, when it is fought by a Marquess and a Boticaria, and not by a broadsheet? For the first time since she had entered the room, the Marquess of Ardleigh smiled. It was a small smile, and brief, and only at one corner of his mouth, but Hugh Fane, who had served him 11 years, saw it and quietly set down the portfolio. It looks, the Marquess said, like the buying of paper. Paper? Debts, Miss Pemberwick, notes of hand, mortgages, bills past due. Lady Augusta has built her house upon paper, as such houses are built. She has counted upon her creditors being many and patient and divided. Mr. Fane will go this afternoon to 3 banks in the city, and by Tuesday next we shall hold every note that bears the Calthorpe name. And then we wait. There will be a ball. There is always a ball. At the ball, Mr. Fane will present a small portfolio to her ladyship in the supper room, and she will read it standing, and she will understand that the house in Cavendish Square is no longer hers, and the carriage at her door no longer hers, and the very pearls at her throat. He glanced at Fane. Forged, said Fane mildly. We have the jeweler's bill from 1808 and the duplicate from 1812, both signed by the same hand. The very pearls at her throat, no longer hers. Charity considered the map. And the broadsheet, my lord. The printing of broadsheets. Will it not occur to her ladyship to print another? It will not signify. A woman who has been led from her own supper-room by her own footman does not print broadsheets that anyone will read. And the girl in Cheapside. The girl in Cheapside will be in this house, with her shop locked behind Mrs. Carstairs' seal and old Tom upon the door, until the night of the ball, after which the girl in Cheapside will decide, in her own time, what she wishes the girl in Cheapside to be. She was silent. The fire spoke. The map lay between them with the brass lions at its corners. My lord, she said at last, I have one condition. Name it. You will not kneel to me again until the matter is finished. Yesterday was a debt of honor, and I have accepted it. I will not be knelt to as a wager." He inclined his head. "Until the matter is finished, then." "Good." She turned to go. At the door she paused, and without looking back she said, "Mr. Fane, Miss, the plates. Do not destroy them. Keep them in your desk. There may be a use for them yet." She went out. The door closed behind her with the small, soft sound proper to a house where every hinge was oiled twice in a year. Hugh Fane looked at the Marquess. The Marquess looked at the closed door. "My lord," said Fane, after a moment, "if I may observe." "You may." "Her ladyship has under-reckoned her opponent by some considerable margin." "Her ladyship," said the Marquess quietly, "has under-reckoned both her opponents." He took up his hat and his gloves from the side table. He did not put them on. "The carriage, Hugh. We go to the city. Threadneedle Street first, then Lombard, then the discount house in Old Jewry that holds the second mortgage upon Cavendish Square. By dusk I wish to hold paper enough to bury a viscountess." "Yes, my lord." "And, Hugh, my lord, send a boy to Cheapside. Have the green door of Pemberwick's shop locked with our own lock, and a man of mine sleeping behind it. The board above the door is to be left exactly as it is. If a stone is thrown at the window tonight, I wish to know who threw it before he reaches the end of his own street." "Yes, my lord." The Marquess put on his gloves at last, one finger at a time, with the slow precision of a man laying out his moves upon a board he intended to win. At the library door he paused, as Charity had paused, and spoke without turning. "Hugh, my lord, the broadsheet, when at last we permit it, will not be theirs, it will be ours, and it will name names." The door closed behind him. In the small green parlor above, Charity Pemberwick stood again at the window with her palm upon the cold pane. The thrush was gone from the gravel. In its place, a black carriage was being brought round from the stables, with old Tom upon the box in his three-cornered hat, and the four bays steaming in the thin sun. She watched the Marquess come down the steps and enter the carriage, and Hugh Fane after him with the portfolio under his arm, and she watched the carriage turn out of the gate towards the city. She did not move from the window for some time. When at last she turned away, her hand went, by habit, to the small pocket at her waist, and found, beneath the folded letter, the thing she had not known was there until that moment. Mrs. Carstairs, passing in the corridor, had slipped it in while she read. It was the brass button, polished, now, until it shone like a small sun, and tied with a single thread of violet silk. The button stayed warm in her palm long after the candle had guttered, and when Charity finally closed her fingers around it, she understood, with a small and private clarity, that the warmth was her own. Sleep did not come. She rose before the gulls began over the Thames, and dressed in the clouded buff gown Mrs. Carstairs had brushed and pressed without comment. The violet thread she kept, the button she sewed inside the seam at her left hip, where no maid would find it, and no mirror would betray it. Then she went down. Ardley House was already awake. A footman in dove livery passed her with a silver salver of letters, his eyes fixed forward as if she had been born to the corridor. She had not. She knew it in the soles of her feet. But she walked. In the breakfast room, the long windows were drawn. The Marquess stood at the sideboard, his back to her, pouring chocolate from a silver pot. He did not turn. He did not need to. "You did not sleep." "No, my lord." "Sit." She sat. He brought the cup himself and set it before her without ceremony, and only then did she see his face. The cicatrice over his brow was paler in the gray light. His jaw was set in the manner of a man who has already heard something he intends to crush. On the table between them lay a single broadsheet, folded once. "Read it," he said, "or do not. The choice is yours, but it will be read by every drawing-room in Mayfair before noon." She unfolded it. The print was cheap, and the ink had bled, but the words were precise enough. "The Witch of Cheapside and the Bewitched Lord." Beneath that, in smaller type, a recitation. That one Charity Pemberwick, apothecary of low birth, had for 3 years compounded philters of dubious herb. That a certain noble house had quietly buried an heir after taking her drafts. That the Marquess of Ardley, once the terror of the French line at Badajoz, had been seen to kneel before her on a public stair like a man emptied of his reason. There was a woodcut, a woman with loose hair, a mortar, and a serpent at her feet. Charity laid the paper down. Her hand did not tremble. She set the cup of chocolate beside it, as if the two things were of equal weight. "There are 5 more," the Marquess said. "Different printers. The same hand wrote them. Hugh is tracing the type. My father's shop. What of it?" "Stones, my lord. Last night, a boy on old Tom's box came past Cheapside before dawn. He brought word with the bread." The Marquess set down his own cup very carefully, as if any sudden motion might break something larger than porcelain. What was taken? Nothing was taken. The front window was put through. The sign was pulled down. A word was painted on the door. What word? She did not say it. He did not press her. He crossed to the bell pull and pulled it once. Mrs. Carstairs appeared as though she had been standing behind the wallpaper. "Send to Cheapside. Glass, signboard, paint, a carpenter, 2 men at the door until further notice. The expense is mine. Tell the apothecary his daughter is well." "My lord," said Mrs. Carstairs, and was gone. Charity rose. "My lord." "Sit down, Miss Pemberwick. I should like to go home." He looked at her then, fully, and for the first time since she had entered his house, she saw the cold thing behind his eyes move. Not toward her, past her, toward something in the street that she could not yet see. "No," he said. It was a small word. He had used it in council to 4 king's ministers and a Russian envoy and a regiment in retreat. He used it now with the same unornamented gravity. "My lord, I have brought this upon you." "You have brought nothing. You were brought. There is a difference, and I will not see you confuse them. The shop will be glazed by nightfall. My father has a guard at his door and a banker's draft on his counter that he will refuse, and which I will deposit with his landlord regardless. My lord, if I go now, quietly, the broadsheets will lose their meat. By Sunday there will be a new scandal. A duchess will elope, a minister will fall. They will forget me. They will not forget you. They will hunt you. There is a method to this paper, Miss Pemberwick. Look again. It is not the work of a tavern wit. It is composed." She looked again. He was right. The cadence was a lady's cadence. The cruelty was a lady's cruelty. "Lady Augusta," she said. "Lady Augusta could not write that woodcut. She paid for it. The hand is a hireling's, but the syntax is hers. Hugh has the printer's boy already. By tonight we shall have the engraver. By tomorrow we shall have the letter that commissioned them. I do not require your absence to fight this. I require your presence." "To what end?" "To the end that when she falls in front of you." The chocolate had gone cold between them. Outside, a wheel turned over wet cobbles. Charity folded her hands in her lap because there was nothing else to do with them, and because the button at her hip was a small, steady weight that reminded her she had chosen to come into this house and could, by some measure she had not yet found, choose how to stand in it. "Then I shall not go," she said. "Good. But I shall not hide either." He inclined his head. "I had not asked you to." A footman came to the door. The Marquess held up one finger without turning, and the footman withdrew. Charity understood that the household had been instructed, somewhere between the small hours and now, that the woman at the breakfast table was not to be interrupted by anyone wearing livery. "There is a thing you must know," he said. "Hugh has been at the desk since midnight. The Calthorpe accounts are not what the world believes. The Viscountess has held her household together with paper for 7 years, notes of hand renewed against notes of hand, 3 mortgages on a single house in Hertfordshire, a jeweller in Cornhill who has not been paid since Michaelmas. By Friday every one of those papers will be in this house. You are buying her debts. I am buying her debts. To what end? To the end that the broadsheets become a footnote and the woman who composed them becomes a tenant of my charity, and the charity is withdrawn." She did not answer at once. There was a quiet pleasure somewhere in the room that she would not yet permit herself. And the ball. "Lady Tewkesbury's ball is Thursday week. Every name worth printing will be there. Lady Augusta has already paid for a gown of lampas silk she cannot afford. She will wear it, she will be received, and then she will be unreceived. And I. You will descend the stair. My lord. You will descend the stair," he said again, more gently. "If you wish to. If you do not wish to, you will remain in this house and read in the green parlor, and no power on earth will compel you. But I should like the ton to see whom they have slandered, and I should like them to see her in the color I have chosen, and I should like Lady Augusta to look up from the foot of the stair, and to know." "To know what?" That I saw you on a wet evening in Cheapside 3 years ago, and that I have known where you were every quarter day since, and that I came down a staircase yesterday because I had decided that morning that I would no longer wait. He had not raised his voice. He had not moved his hand. The thing he had said sat between them on the table beside the broadsheet, larger than the broadsheet, and Charity found that she could look at it without flinching. "You will require a gown," she said at last. "Madame Fournier is in the green parlor now. She has been there since 7. A laugh escaped her, small and astonished. He did not laugh, but the corner of his mouth changed by a degree, which was perhaps the only laugh he kept. She went to the green parlor. Madame Fournier was a small, neat woman with pins along her cuff and a measuring ribbon worn thin at the center. She did not curtsy beyond what was correct, and she did not ask after the broadsheets, and Charity loved her for both. "Mademoiselle," said Madame Fournier, "his lordship has named the color, Mazarine blue. Will you permit me?" "I will permit you." The ribbon moved over her shoulders, her waist, the inside of her arm. Madame Fournier made small marks in a notebook and hummed under her breath a tune Charity did not know. "He has named the silver also," Madame Fournier said, without looking up. "An overskirt of silver gauze. It is unusual for so young a lady. I think it will become you. You have dressed Lady Augusta." The ribbon paused, then continued. "I have dressed her, yes. And she has not paid since the spring. I should not say so. I say so because his lordship has paid every account in my book this morning before I came, and because the gown she wears on Thursday will be the last gown of mine she wears in this town." Charity was silent. "Stand straight, mademoiselle. There. The diamonds will fall here and here. You must not stoop. You have nothing to stoop for." By noon, a second broadsheet had reached the kitchen, and a third the stables. Mrs. Carstairs intercepted both and burned them in the still-room grate without remark. Hugh Fane came up the back stair at 1:30 with ink on his cuff and a small leather case under his arm. He spoke with the Marquess in the library for 19 minutes by the long case clock, then went out again into the rain. At 3 o'clock, a stone came through a window of the south wing. Old Tom found the boy. Old Tom did not strike him. Old Tom set him in the kitchen with bread and small beer and asked him who had paid him, and the boy, between mouthfuls, named a man in a grey coat who had given him a shilling at the corner of Mount Street. Mrs. Carstairs wrote the description on a slip of paper and gave it to a footman, and the footman went out, and within the hour the slip had become a name, and the name had become a second name, and the second name was the name of a clerk who had once kept the books for the Calthorpe stables. Charity learned none of this until the evening. She had been at her measurements, then at a long, quiet hour in the library, where Lady May Trevelyan had asked her to read aloud from a book of Cowper's letters. Lady May had wept once, very briefly, at a passage about a hare. Then she had laughed at herself and said, "Go on, my dear. You read beautifully. My brother told me you would." It was full dusk when the Marquess sent for her again. He was in the small study. The fire was low. On the desk between them lay another paper. This one was not a broadsheet. It was a letter, in a hand she had never seen, addressed to the editor of the Morning Post. "It will be in tomorrow's edition," he said. "My lord, read it." She read it. The letter was written as from a respectable physician of Lincoln's Inn Fields, and it deposed, with citation of dates and quantities, that the apothecary Pemberwick of Cheapside had supplied, on 3 occasions in the autumn of 1813, a draught of foxglove and pennyroyal to a lady of quality who had subsequently miscarried. The lady was not named, the dates were precise, the draughts had never been compounded. Charity laid the letter down. The fire snapped. "It is a forgery," she said. "It is a competent forgery. The physician is real. The lady is real. The miscarriage is real. The draught is invented. Hugh has the physician already. The physician will retract by Tuesday. And until Tuesday. Until Tuesday the Morning Post will print it, and the drawing-rooms will read it, and your name will be in every breakfast room from Grosvenor Square to Berkeley Street." She sat down without being asked. The button at her hip was a small, hard star. "My lord, I should like to ask you something, and I should like you to answer me plainly." "Ask? When you came down the stair yesterday, did you know that this would follow?" He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I knew that something would follow. I did not know it would be this." I had thought she would attempt a duel by proxy, or a writ. I had not thought she would attempt your character. I underestimated her, and I am sorry for it. You are sorry. I am sorry that you have read those words today. I am not sorry that I came down the stair. Nor am I. He looked at her. My lord, if I am to descend a stair on Thursday week, I should like to know what I am descending into. You are descending into a room of 700 people who will have read every word of every paper printed against you, and who will turn at the top of the stair and see you in mazarine blue, and a parure of diamonds, and a face they have not earned the right to know. You will not speak, you will not need to. I shall be at the foot of the stair, Hugh will be at the door of the supper room with a leather case, Lady Augusta will be by the orchestra in lampas silk, and she will look up, and she will understand. And if she does not understand, then Hugh will explain. Charity rose. The fire had burned to a low red eye. Somewhere in the house a clock struck the hour, and another, slower clock struck it after. My lord, she said, at the door, the word on my father's shop. He waited. It was which? He did not move. He did not curse. He set both hands flat on the desk for a single instant, and she saw the tendons under the skin go pale, and then he lifted them again and folded them behind his back. Thursday week, he said. Thursday week, she answered. She went out. In the corridor, a footman waited with a candle. She walked back through the long gallery of Ardley portraits, past a Lely and a Reynolds and an empty space where a frame had once hung, and at the foot of the great stair she stopped, because Mrs. Carstairs had come out of a side door with a small pewter cup of warmed milk and honey. Drink it, miss. I cannot. You can. His lordship has not eaten since dawn either. You will eat tomorrow. Tonight you will drink this and you will sleep, because tomorrow the dressmaker returns at 7 and the jeweler at 10. Charity drank it. It tasted of childhood and of nothing she could name. In her room a small fire had been built up and the bedclothes turned down. On the pillow lay a sprig of rosemary tied with the same violet thread. She did not ask who had put it there. She set it on the table beside the brass button in its little dish, and she stood at the window a long while, watching the rain over the roofs of Mayfair. Somewhere out there, a printing press was setting type for the morning edition. Somewhere a viscountess in a turban of purple satin was reading a proof and laughing into a glass of ratafia. Somewhere her father was sweeping glass off a swept floor and refusing, for the third time, to take a banker's draft from a man in grey livery. And here, in a room she had not chosen, in a house she had not been born to, Charity Pemberwick set her palm against the cold pane and found that she was not afraid. She was something else, and it had no name yet, and she did not need to give it one tonight. Below, in the courtyard, a single horse came in at the gate. Hugh Fane stepped down from the saddle with rain running off the brim of his hat and a sealed packet under his arm. He looked up once at the lit window of the small study, and the Marquess's shadow passed across the curtain, and Hugh went in. The packet, Charity would learn in the morning, contained a letter in Lady Augusta Calthorpe's own hand, paying a printer in Holborn the sum of 40 guineas for the composition of 6 broadsheets and 1 forged deposition, and requiring, by underlined instruction, that the woodcut include a serpent. But that was the morning. Tonight there was only the rain, the small pewter cup gone empty on the sill, the sprig of rosemary, the brass button, and a stair somewhere in the dark at the top of which, 8 evenings hence, she would have to set her foot down without trembling. She did not yet know how she would do it. She only knew that she would. She turned from the window, and she put out the candle, and the house went quiet around her like a held breath. The night of the ball arrived without permission, the way storms arrive over the Thames. Charity stood very still while Mrs. Carstairs fastened the last hook between her shoulder blades. The mazarine blue silk settled against her ribs like cool water, and the silver gauze over it caught the candlelight and threw it back in small, deliberate pieces. She watched her own hands in the glass. They were still red at the knuckles. 3 years of rose oil and lye did not vanish under a single pair of kid gloves. "Higher, please," Mrs. Carstairs said to the maid behind her, and the diamond tiara was set into her hair with the care a priest gives a relic. Charity lifted her chin. The 3 strands of the diamond necklace lay against her collarbone like a frozen river. "There," Mrs. Carstairs said. "There you are." In the long mirror, the Boticaria of Cheapside was gone. What stood in her place was a woman a kingdom might bow to. Charity found, with some surprise, that she did not flinch from the sight. She had stopped flinching the night the windows of the apothecary were stoned. After the stones, mirrors held no terror. She turned from the glass. "Is he in the library?" "With Mr. Fane, my lady." She did not correct the title. She would, later. Not tonight. She walked the long corridor alone. The house had been transformed for the season's last ball. Beeswax and orange flowers, hothouse lilies in silver bowls, the great staircase dressed in laurel. From below, the first guests already murmured. She recognized the timbre of London at its worst. Low, hungry, well-bred. In the library, the Marquess of Ardley stood at the window with his back to the door. Black velvet, gold thread, the carmine ribbon of his service medals catching the firelight. Hugh Fane sat at the desk, the leather portfolio open before him, papers stacked in 3 precise piles. "My lord," Charity said. Constantine Lascelles turned. For a long moment he did not speak. His gray eyes moved over her once, and the muscle in his jaw moved once, and that was all. "Mr. Fane," he said at last, without looking away from her, "we are ready." Fane closed the portfolio. He tied the ribbon with a small, neat bow, as if wrapping a gift. "All 3 piles, my lord?" "All 3, in the order we agreed." Fane bowed. He went out, and the door shut behind him with the softness of a thing intentional. Constantine crossed the room. He stopped a pace from her. He did not touch her. "You may still refuse this," he said. "Say the word, and the carriage is at the side door. Old Tom is already on the box. I know. There will be no quiet way through tonight. After this hour, no one in London will mistake who you are. I know." He searched her face. Whatever he found there made him exhale, very slowly, through his nose. He offered his arm. She laid her gloved hand on the black velvet. They walked to the top of the great staircase, and they paused. Below, the hall was full. Plumes and turbans and powdered shoulders, the glitter of paste and the glitter of the real thing, and at the foot of the stair, exactly where Charity had once stood in clouded buff wool with coins ringing on the marble, Lady Augusta Calthorpe in lampas the color of mulberry, flanked by Lavinia in ivory, and Harriet in pink taffeta. The Calthorpes had not yet seen who stood at the top. The herald struck the floor with his staff. His lordship, the most honorable the Marquess of Ardley. The murmur rose, dipped, waited. And Miss Charity Pemberwick of Cheapside. The hall did not gasp. The hall did something stranger. It held its breath, all together, as one animal. Lady Augusta's painted mouth parted. The plumes on her turban trembled. Lavinia's fan stopped mid-flutter. Harriet's hand went to her throat, as if she had been struck there. Charity descended on the Marquess's arm, one step at a time, in the rhythm of a clock. She did not look at the Calthorpes. She looked at the chandelier, and at the laurel along the banister, and at nothing in particular, and the looking at nothing was its own answer. At the foot of the stair, the crowd parted without being asked. Constantine led her 3 paces forward. Then he released her hand. Then, in front of the assembled peerage of England, the Marquess of Ardley went down on one knee a second time. Somewhere a glass struck a tray and shattered. No one turned to see. "My lady," he said, and his voice carried. 3 years ago, in a Cheapside alley, a stranger pressed a bottle of rose oil into a wound on my temple, and would not take my coin. I have searched for her in every parish in this city. I have found her. I will ask, here, before the witnesses she was denied, will you do me the honor? He did not put the question with a question mark. He put it as a fact already decided, and waited only for her acceptance of the fact. Charity looked down at his bowed head. The candlelight ran along the black of his hair. "You may rise, my lord." He rose. She had not yet answered. The hall had noticed. "Before I give my reply," she said, in the small, clear voice she used to count out drachms of camphor, "there is a matter of accounts." She turned, half a step, toward the place where Lady Augusta stood frozen in mulberry silk. "Mr. Fane." Hugh Fane came forward with the portfolio. He did not bow to the Calthorpes. He bowed only to her. "My lady, read the first pile." Fane opened the portfolio. He spoke without inflection, as a man reads a will. "Calthorpe House, Hanover Square, mortgaged in 1809 against Coots. Mortgage purchased by an agent of this house in March of the present year. Interest in arrears, 11 quarters. Total owing as of this morning, £23,000. A gentleman near the punch table set his glass down. Calthorpe Estate, Hampshire. Second mortgage, 1812, against Drummond's. Purchased by the same agent in April. 6 quarters in arrears. Total owing, 9,400. Lady Augusta took a step backward. The plumes on her turban shivered as if a wind had passed. Personal note of hand, Lady Augusta Calthorpe to Madame Roussel of Bond Street, for the trousseau of the Mrs. Calthorpe, dated January last. Purchased in May. Unpaid, 1,800. Lavinia made a sound. It was very small. It did not carry past the second row. Read the second pile, Mr. Fane. He set down the first sheaf. He took up the second. A letter, in the hand of Lady Augusta Calthorpe, addressed to her agent in the city, dated the eve of the events of the 11th of June, instructing the said agent to procure a string of pearls similar in workmanship to those of the late Lady Calthorpe, to place the said string in the reticule of one Charity Pemberwick during a visit she would shortly be summoned to make, and to ensure that the discovery thereof was witnessed by no fewer than 3 persons of standing. The hall, this time, did make a sound. It was the sound a forest makes when a great tree begins to fall, a single low creak, and then the silence that comes before the rest. The original of this letter, Fane added, is now in the keeping of Bow Street. Lady Augusta's hand rose to her throat. Her rings flashed once. Lies, she said. The word came out smaller than she had intended. Lies. The woman is she has... The third pile, Mr. Fane. Fane set down the second sheaf. He took up the third. He did not look at Lady Augusta. He looked, with the steady mildness of his profession, at the room. Notice of foreclosure on Calthorpe House, to take effect at sunrise tomorrow. Notice of foreclosure on the Hampshire estate, the same. Notice of public auction of all movable property therein, by Christie's, to be advertised in the morning papers. Notice of suit for criminal conspiracy to defraud, sworn out this afternoon at Bow Street against Lady Augusta Calthorpe, Miss Lavinia Calthorpe, and Miss Harriet Calthorpe, in the matter of the false accusation of theft against Miss Charity Pemberwick on the 11th of June. He closed the portfolio. That is the whole of the account, my lady. Charity inclined her head a quarter of an inch. Thank you, Mr. Fane. She turned, then to Lady Augusta, and she crossed the marble herself. She walked the same diagonal she had walked 3 months before, in clouded buff wool, with a bottle of rose oil in her apron and her bonnet ribbons damp from the rain. She stopped at exactly the spot where the coins had rung. She did not raise her voice. A commoner doesn't belong here, she said. I believe those were your words. Lady Augusta's mouth moved. Nothing came out of it. I have come, madam, to return them to you. She held the older woman's eye for the count of 3. Then she stepped past her, as one steps past a chair, and she walked back to the Marquess. The Calthorpes' own footmen, men whose wages had not been paid since Lady Day, moved without being summoned. 2 flanked Lady Augusta. 1 went to each daughter. They did not lay hands. They did not need to. They simply walked the 3 women toward the door, in a quiet procession, the way servants escort guests whose carriages have come. Lady May Trevelyan watched from the alcove by the harp, her wicker chair drawn forward at her brother's order, so that she might see the whole length of the hall. Her gray steel eyes were warm. She lifted her cashmere shawl higher on her shoulders and did not trouble to hide her small, pleased smile. Beside her, Mrs. Carstairs stood with her hands folded over the silver keys at her waist, and the keys, for once, were silent. At the threshold, Lady Augusta turned. She tried one final time to find a face in the crowd that would meet hers. None did. The plumes on her turban dipped, and she was led out into the night, and the great doors of Ardley House closed behind her with a sound like a book being shut. Constantine offered his arm again. Will you walk in the garden, my lady? Yes. Before they reached the orangery doors, an elderly duchess in lavender silk caught Charity's gloved fingers in her own and pressed them briefly. My dear, she said, my grandson took a chill at Eton last spring. The apothecary in Cheapside sent him a tincture of horehound. He lives because of it. I had never thought to thank her in person. You have thanked her now, your grace, Charity said. The duchess inclined her plumed head and stepped back, and the small ripple of her gesture moved through the room behind her. A baroness curtsied. A general bowed. The The faces that had watched her descend the stair in silence now looked at her with the careful attention reserved, in that hall, for the very powerful. The shift had taken less than a quarter of an hour. London learned its lessons quickly, when the lesson was paid in foreclosures. Constantine led her past them all without pausing. He had no further use for the room. They went out through the long windows of the orangery, into the rose garden, where the white June roses were heavy with the day's heat, and the gravel was pale under the moon. The noise of the ball thinned behind them until it was only a hum, like bees in a far hive. He stopped beside the oldest bush. He took from the inner pocket of his coat a small object wrapped in black silk. He unfolded the silk in his palm. It was the brass button from his coat. The button she had pressed into a fold of clean linen 3 years ago to stop a stranger's blood. It had been set, now, into a locket of plain gold. No jewels, no chasing. Only the worn brass face of the button in the center, ringed in soft yellow metal, like a sun behind a coin. He lifted it by its chain. "You kept this," he said. "I knew you kept this. I have wanted, every day since, to give it back to you in a form you could wear." She bent her head. He fastened the chain at her nape. The locket settled below the diamonds, and it was the diamonds that looked the smaller of the two. He did not kneel a third time. He had used his knees already. He understood economy. "In your terms," he said, "whatever they are, name them." She thought for a moment. The roses smelled of honey and dust. "My shop in Cheapside is to remain open," she said. "Under a manager I shall choose. Its profits to a fund for the apothecary's widows. I will not have it shut, because I have left the lane. Done. My mother's grave at St. Botolph's is to be kept. A stone, simple. Her name and the dates, and nothing else. Done. I will not be presented at court in a gown chosen by anyone but myself." The corner of his mouth moved. "Done, my lady, and gladly." "And the button," she said, "stays as it is, no jewels added, ever. On my honor." She was quiet for a long breath. He waited. He had waited 3 years for her. He could wait the length of a breath. She lifted her hand. She did not give it to him in the manner of a lady accepting a proposal. She turned it over, palm upward, the way she had turned it 3 years ago in a wet alley, when she had pressed a stoppered bottle of rose oil into a stranger's hand and refused his coin. He looked at the open palm. He understood. He bent his head. He pressed his lips to the center of it, to the small pale scar where, long before either of them had names for the other, a pestle had slipped. When he straightened, he did not let her hand go. "On my terms, my lord," she said, "we have a bargain. On your terms, my lady, always." They stood a little while among the roses, neither speaking, the locket warm against her collarbone, where it had no business being warmer than diamonds, and yet was. Beyond the garden wall, the lamps of the mews threw small yellow squares against the cobbles. Old Tom was there with the long brown coat and the tricorn and the red and black scarf, holding the carriage horses' bridles, waiting, as he had waited on a rainy night in March, for whatever his master required of him. He touched the brim of his hat to her through the gate. She inclined her head in answer. He had been the first servant of the house to call her my lady, the morning after the rainy night, and he had not since changed the practice. From the house, very faint, a quartet began the first set. The morning papers were already being set in type. By breakfast, the auction notice would be in every coffee house from St. James's to the Strand. By noon, the criminal suit would be the talk of every drawing room within the bills of mortality. The Calthorpe name, which had survived 3 reigns and 2 civil disturbances, would not survive the week. It was not a thing the Marquess had needed to say aloud. It was simply the shape of what he had built, quietly, in the months Charity had thought herself friendless. London would dance tonight. London would talk, tomorrow and for years, of the night the Marquess of Ardley knelt twice in a single season, once to a girl in clouded buff and once to the same girl in mazarine blue, and of the matriarch who had been walked out of his hall by her own unpaid footman. Charity turned her face up to the moon. The night was warm. The night was hers. She had, in the end, not been wanted in their hall. She had only been, at last, truly seen. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever stood in a grand room, in your plainest dress, and refused to bend down for coins thrown at your feet? Is there a small object in your life, like Charity's metal button, that someone has been carrying for years without your knowing? And when the world finally sees you for who you truly are, do you believe you will descend that staircase in silence or with words? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about quiet dignity, justice delivered with patience, and true love that arrives against all odds, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.